find someone with all your
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video we're going to talk all about these guys and their dietary needs, such as staple feeders, things you can feed more occasionally, treat feeders, as well as supplementation like vitamins and calcium and all that good stuff. If there's anything at the end of the video that I forgot to mention about their diets, leopard gecko care in general, or just any of the exotics I own, don't be afraid to ask me in the comments below or message me on Instagram, which is Emmy's Pets, or you can follow my shop. I also recommend following my shop, which is Shop Emmy's Pets on Instagram, so you can be updated when I'm going to start posting stickers, future shirts and sweatshirts, etc., and all that fun stuff. So with everything being said, we're going to jump into the video. Right here I have one of my leopard geckos. His name is Fletcher. I also have another female leopard gecko, as well as a gecko that is currently lost in my house somewhere. I'm planning to make an entire video about that and just losing reptiles, because it happens very, very often, sadly. So with everything being said, let's just jump into the video and start talking about their dietary requirements. Let's just start off what you should be feeding your leopard gecko. Leopard geckos are purely insectivores, which basically means that they can only eat insects. That is all they will eat. That is what is good for them. That is what their bodies are made for, to eat. Some people are like, oh, I can feed mine fruits and vegetables and eat it. But you can feed a dog chocolate and they'll probably take it, but that doesn't mean it is good for them or they should be eating it or it is necessary in their diet. So they do not need to eat vegetables or greens like that or anything like that. So it does make it very easy when you are feeding your animals, since they don't need a huge platter of, you know, a bunch of variation with greens and fruits and things like that. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't have a variation of bugs and insects and things like that. But it does make it a little bit easier if you are okay with having insects, because they make such amazing pets. So honestly, it is very, very worth it. Let's talk about staple feeders, things you can feed on a very regular basis. Obviously, you need to include other things as well as giving them treats and things that they can have more occasionally. But there are some feeders that you can feed very often that will not, you know, long-term give them anything that they can't digest or have issues with. So mainly what I feed my leopard geckos as staples are crickets, dubia roaches, and mealworms. Mealworms I would recommend not feeding as often. I try to use them more as a little bit more occasional, but if I am like stuck or something and can't get crickets or dubias that week, I will be okay feeding mealworms. It's just their exoskeleton is pretty hard, so you do want to be careful how much and how often you're feeding them, because they can actually get impacted, and there's been multiple leopard geckos that have sadly passed away from only being fed them. So they're not the best to feed, but they're not the worst either, so I would just recommend feeding them a little bit more sparingly. So dubias and crickets are definitely the best stuff as a staple, and feeding them very often. Good occasional bugs would probably be superworms. You can feed mealworms. They're kind of in between occasional and staples in my opinion, but people will say different things. You can feed silkworms more occasionally. I wouldn't feed them super often either, but they're a little bit more in the treat realm, but they're not awful. And you can also feed phoenix worms occasionally as well. So these are things that you could feed more like bi-weekly, and or else just feed 1 or 2 worms each time you feed them every few days, or whatever your schedule is for your leopard gecko. So you shouldn't be feeding these every single feeding and a lot of them, but you can give these, you know, every feeding, and just giving a little less than you usually would for staple feeders. And we have treat feeders, which are my pet's favorites, obviously. You can feed silkworms as treats. They're kind of in between occasional and treats. You can feed waxworms, which are definitely on the treat realm. I give my leopard geckos waxworms like once a month, but I will give them a little bit extra than they probably should have, just because I don't get them super often. So basically you can give one or two every week or so as like treats. It's basically like McDonald's for leopard geckos. They love them, but you shouldn't feed them super often. And properly sized hornworms you can also feed. They're very hydrating, but they are pretty fatty and full of a lot of protein, so you definitely need to feed them more sparingly. And hornworms get very big, so you need to get the right size of hornworm for them. You can feed these again probably once every, I would say, 2 weeks, and this is kind of the treat realm. I know that there is other bugs that you can feed, but these are just the ones I'm going to cover since they're the most basic feeders you can possibly get. Another huge question I get: how often should I feed my leopard gecko? Now this is a little bit hard to answer because every single leopard gecko is going to hold weight differently. Some leopard geckos lose weight very easy, some hold on to weight very easy, some are kind of, you know, in between. Just like people, everyone holds weight differently. Some people lose it really easy, some gain it literally eating nothing. My leopard gecko did that. She went off feed for 3 months and gained 2 grams. Don't ask me how it happened, I'm not sure. But I roughly it is for a baby that is under 4 months. You should feed them every day to every other day, and then once they get over 4 months, start feeding them every other day to every 2 days, and then adults every 3 to 7 days, just depending how much that they gain weight. I know there's some people that feed their adult leopard gecko every other day because they, you know, don't retain like fat very well, but there's some that gain weight so easily that they are constantly on a diet and are only fed about once a week, and that's just what works for them. So it completely depends on your leopard gecko's weights. I will put a chart of leopard gecko healthy weights up on the screen, so try to base it off of that. So if you notice your gecko's getting a little bit pudgy, maybe, you know, back up the amount of food or how often you're feeding them. And if it's the opposite, maybe try feeding them a couple worms or a couple more crickets than you usually do, or try feeding them like a day earlier than you usually do. But if you're having any issues with your leopard gecko's weight, or you're just not completely sure, message me on Instagram at Emmy's Pets. Send me a picture of your leopard gecko and just let me know that you need help, like identifying their weight and how often and what they should be feeding them, and give me kind of a rough description of how often you're feeding them, what you're feeding them, etc. And I will try to help and either help them to stay the right weight or gain weight, lose weight, etc. Then we have supplementation. Supplementation is very easy, but also very easily overlooked. A lot of people don't do research, and this is how MBD happens, which is metabolic bone disease. I made an entire video about it. If you'd like to watch it, I will link it in the description. Otherwise, you can just go a little ways back on my channel. So right here we have my 3 supplements. So this is vitamin powder, this is calcium with D3, and then this is calcium without D3. So I'm just going to try and explain this the best I can because it's a little bit confusing, but it's not too bad. So I recommend feeding calcium D3 the most often. I feed this for 2 feedings in a row. So I feed my leopard gecko, since they're both adults, every 3 to 4 days, and that is just what works for them. They're both on diets currently because they're both a little bit pudgy, but you know, we're working on it. I know, he's angry about it. But I feed this for 2 feedings straight, and then the next feeding I feed just calcium with no D3. Then I go back and feed this another 2 feedings, and then I do vitamins. So I basically feed 2 feedings and then just flip-flop every 3 feedings with the vitamins and just calcium. So I hope that makes sense. But then there are things called calcium pits. Basically, when they're being fed too much calcium or too much supplements, it just goes to basically their armpits. And there's nothing bad about it, but they just kind of stores there because they have so much. So at that point, you want to take down the amount of calcium they have. But if they have pretty bubbled ones, that means they have a good amount of calcium. So you just want to stop feeding them calcium in total. So when this happens, my leopard gecko Luna right now actually has this. I actually have not been adding any supplements onto her food, and hers have been going down, but it has taken a few weeks. But I just add this every other feeding, which is just vitamins, because she's storing the calcium, not the vitamins. So I just feed this a little bit more often, but then I just completely don't feed any D3 or calcium in general. For extra calcium, I always recommend having in their enclosure is have like either a little, you know, bottle cap full or just a tiny little cup full of some calcium with no D3. Because you don't want them to get too much D3. And again, it'll go to their pits, and I hear too much D3 can actually be bad for them. I'm not completely sure if that's true. It might be a myth. I don't know. But I would just recommend putting calcium with no D3 in a little cap or a little tiny dish in their enclosure, because if they do need more calcium than they are getting, they can basically just lick it up. They know when they need more calcium, and they can find. That is it for the video. I know it's kind of a lot to swallow, especially with all the supplementation, but if you guys have any other questions or you want me to slowly break it down better in text, if you do better with that type of stuff, that's totally fine. Just make sure you comment below or DM me again on Instagram. Please follow my shop, and just thank you guys so much for 960 subscribers. I don't even know what to say at this point. It is crazy. I say it every single time, which you guys are probably like, oh, shut up. But I am genuinely so thankful, and I never want to make it seem like I, you know, am not grateful, or I just, you know, like, I'm not, I don't know how to explain this well. I'm very grateful for you guys, and I never want to make it seem like I never appreciate you guys or underappreciate you guys. I love you guys so much. So again, if you have any other issues or any other questions, don't be afraid to ask me, and I'll see you guys next time. I love you so much. Stay awesome. Bye, guys.